Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining today's webinar. I'm Lauren Malevich. I'm the Director of Marketing and Business Development at Simplify. Today, we have our Senior Solution Director, Beth McBreen, who will be discussing and demoing our prepackaged solution for compensation planning and analytics. After the call, please feel free to reach out to Beth or myself with any questions about the webinar. And now I will hand it over to Beth. Thanks.
Thanks, Lauren. And thank you all for joining today's webinar. As Lauren mentioned, we're going to be covering off Simplify's prepackaged solution around HR planning and analytics. We will be covering, talking about upfront a couple slides that I have around use case, what are typical business problems and goals, kind of what is included with our prepackaged Accelerator solution, the components that are included. And then again, some like prerequisites, things talking about data sources, and all that. So as Lauren mentioned, my name is Beth McBreen. I am the Solutions Director with Simplify. Been focusing the last decade or more on EPM and analytics solutions. So happy to be here today and to share some of this information. Once we get done, I have a couple slides here. I will flip over and give a live demonstration of our Planning Accelerator for you to take a look at and kind of see the different components. Definitely salary and wage expense right now is probably, it's undoubtedly one of the largest expenses for a company. And now, probably now more than ever, given current events and recent events going on in our world, companies are starting to analyze. They're probably running different scenarios, forecasts, things of that nature to really monitor and look at the costs closely and very carefully. So hopefully you can kind of take a look at the Accelerator too from that light and what it can provide to you, some of those resources to be able to handle some of that scenarios, analysis, and so forth. So we'll talk a little bit about just the prepackaged solution and typically what we're approached with when it comes to business problems and why we chose to, again, kind of look at this as a prepackaged solution that companies could deploy into their analytics cloud environments. Typically, a lot of times we find companies are doing their payroll planning very manually. We're in Excel. And it's, again, very manual, tedious process, especially if you're doing planning down to an employee level. On top of that, you're dealing with then sensitive personnel information that is, potentially in an Excel spreadsheet. We don't want that information getting into the wrong hands. So having a solution to be able to house that and to really be able to secure that down is very important. As I mentioned, probably more than ever right now is planning version control, right? We want to take different scenarios on what's happening, even in today's world, right? We're experiencing where the government is providing tax credits to companies. So how I can fluctuate that, taking a look at the number of employees and what that max credit is going to be, how that can affect my overall forecast and reforecast for the year. So having different versions and that version control is very important as well. That's hard to do, in a more manual environment. The variance commentary, sometimes it's hard to collect and explain when you're working in a manual setting as well. Analytics Cloud has capability to be able to store comments, to be able to view, comments that others have left in regards to why they're planning by employee a certain way, bonuses, promotions, transfers, things of that nature. So again, all of those are kind of those business problems are solved with the prepackaged solution for the HR planning that we're talking about today. So when we talk about kind of solution goals for the planning, what the solution kind of takes into account, providing a process flow to really guide the admin and users through the planning process. So having that, again, click capabilities to drive right to my template, to make my adjustments. The drivers, right? Drivers, or, you know, kind of what I look at as global assumptions, right? For payroll planning, we may have things like merit increase. We have our payroll tax percentages, limits on, you know, FICA, for example. All of those type of global assumptions, as I'll call them, are drivers. That's really what they are, to help drive kind of payroll taxes and benefits based off your employee-based salary. Those are all kind of set up within the system, within our solution. So planning at a cost center level and an employee level. So what I'll probably show you today is more geared towards an employee level, just so you can see the most granularity. Keep in mind that if you're doing this only at a cost center level, of course, you can roll that up. But the intent for this prepackaged solution is to be able to give you that granularity down to an employee or a position level of detail. So we're including salary and wages, obviously things like overtime, merits, promotions, having the taxes and benefits, federal and state, transfers. So we'll talk about, you know, having somebody that is in your a sales cost center and needs to move to a marketing cost center, being able to have a automated process within Analytics Cloud to achieve this. So those type of things are included, are kind of the goals, right, or what we would be looking for if we wanted to use this solution. Headcount and FTE planning, of course. So to be able to provide kind of print-ready reports, and overall, kind of looking at, you know, a goal for my HR planning would be to reduce my effort, right, from that manual state, from that version control state, and from a secured environment state. So just talking briefly, I kind of mentioned a couple of those in the last slide, but maybe, you know, kind of peeling back a little bit, what is exactly included in the accelerator that we have built? And so it really has the following assets. We've got just using the standard configuration that we have for for version comparisons, which ultimately leads to kind of variance reporting and such. We have scripted advanced formula calculations that provide compensation projections, you know, like benefits and taxes, the transfers that I mentioned of employees, and then just as well some variance analysis. So we have the data action triggers that are identified in the stories that you'll see here coming up that will trigger each one of these calculations. Also included in here is some of the reporting. So we look at reporting and analysis around cost centers, entities, variances, and as I mentioned before, all kind of wrapped up in a process flow that is helpful to kind of guide you in the overall process. Okay. So what's included? You know, I'll say a couple things with just in general with Analytics Cloud and with this HR planning accelerator is it's a quick way to, you know, we're talking about a couple of weeks deployment versus a couple of months. You know, being able to create and basically import this solution into your Analytics Cloud environment, again, it's kind of a very quick turnover, especially if you're looking to utilize these things for your upcoming planning cycle. You know, the realization that this is a cloud-based solution, Analytics Cloud, and so the ability to help you deploy it very quickly, cloud versus on-prem, is primarily the work is done remotely and can be done remotely. And, you know, again, kind of given where we're at these days, most of us are stationed at home anyway, but that won't stop us from kind of helping you get acclimated and up to speed should you need to use something along these lines for your planning cycle. But what are the prerequisites? You know, we kind of look at, obviously, you do need Analytics Cloud planning licenses. So currently there's planning professional, planning standard, and obviously the analytic licenses as well. We have, there's a prerequisite for the connection. So if we want to have automated integration between SAP or other, there is a HANA Cloud connector, which is basically a very small installation on a server that kind of brokers that connection between systems. So certainly those two items would be kind of considered prerequisites. And what I talked about before, that's what's included with those assets that we talked about in a couple slides earlier, is you are receiving a model, the calculations, and the templates. And then there will be a sample data set that is provided so that when it is deployed into your environment, you're able to see how the model would work. And of course, then you kind of wonder, well, how do you deploy the solution? And so there's basically being able to make the modifications to the master data to align with yours. There is kind of the consulting services from a deployment and training perspective where we can help support those. And then again, any of the customizations that I just mentioned with master data, dimensions, templates, anything that you would want to maybe adjust and make it more customized to your environment. So as far as then supported data sources, because this question comes up a lot, obviously SAP, it will utilize standard business and the SAP content. It also then supports flat files. So a lot of times if you have an outside payroll system that you're wanting to pull in base salaries for or other that we need to update, we need to update employee master data counts and things of that nature. Certainly those type of flat file imports are as well used quite frequently within the Analytics Cloud environment. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking on the slides. I know that the more exciting piece is to actually watch the demo live. So just give me one moment. I will switch over to my Google Chrome here. So where I'm actually starting, I'm going to jump into the HR planning component, but I think it's just important just to touch on quickly that this is kind of a dashboard, a finance dashboard for us from a planning and analytics capacity. So we've got things like our analytics that we can jump into, P&L planning, but then you can kind of see that we also have, this is basically a dashboard is a launch point for us. So for our organization, we can come in and I can say, okay, we want to handle some high-level P&L planning, maybe target planning. I've got sales and margin focused planning, expense planning. We're going to talk about here is our HR planning accelerator. We also have accelerators around capital expenditures. So from here, I have basically, I can click to open up our HR planning process flow, right? This is kind of our launch pad. And again, comes with some associated visualizations, but let me close out of this one. But essentially, we have some steps that we've aligned here. You can see here, step 1 and step 2 aren't active links right now. This is, I'm not going to cover it during this webinar, but essentially this is more on the data load aspect. So this will vary slightly. You know, you're going to want to update, you know, the first step in probably any HR planning is we want to make sure that we have the relevant employees, active employees versus non-active positions, make sure that we have all the positions, everything basically updated within the model. And then we also are going to, from our payroll system, we're going to load in base pay for each one of our employees. So those are 2 steps that I would say are preliminary admin steps that we will do to feed the system with what we need to get started for our plan. We also then on step 3 here, so just kind of talking through what we have here is we have a step that is more admin focused, that is going to be those drivers, those global assumptions, things that we want to be able to calculate for all employees against what their salaries are. And so those we store, we will, again, store at a high level, at a summarized level, and that will be included then when we get into our cost center inputs. So we'll dive into then our template and the cost center inputs by employee. So being able to update when employees may be starting or, or maybe being terminated, or updates to their bonus amounts, anything along those lines. Being able to add new employees. So obviously loading HR base pay is only going to be relevant, or my updated employee list is only going to be relevant for employees that I currently have. But what happens if I'm planning on hiring another 5, 6 employees to my cost center? How do I achieve that? So being able to create new employees and then being able to leveraging those data actions to automatically calculate my payroll taxes and benefits, so that I have kind of a fully burdened expense by employee. We have also included in here the cost center transfers. So being able to, again, take a individual, multiple folks and move them and their expenses and their associated payroll taxes and benefits, all of those pieces being moved from one cost center to another. Being able to do that pretty seamlessly is a nice feature that's included in here as well. And then we also have then just focused on cost center reporting and entity reporting, some canned reports for you to be able to use and build off of. Finally, there is the ability to push. So many times if you already are an Analytics Cloud user and you already have Analytics Cloud at your company, you may already have a finance model or a consolidated reporting model, in which case you may want to take this very granular data and be able to take and push it to a cost center level in your finance model, right, for maybe your financial reporting or high-level financial planning. And so we have a data action that is kind of a blanket data action right now that would be able to push it. We would have to update, obviously, customize those to whatever model name you have, but the ability that is also a placeholder that is out there within the Accelerator to be able to accomplish that for you. All right, so let's take a look at a couple of these inputs that we can do. Go ahead and click on my admin. Keep in mind, hopefully, I don't know if you can see the top of my screen, but okay, let me get to this. There we go. When I click from my process flow, when I click on a new template, it automatically opens up into a new tab. So this, from a standpoint, being able to now toggle between different tabs and go back, is very helpful versus having to always overwrite, and have to go back and reopen things. So kind of keeps it nice, allows you to open it once and then it'll be out there in a separate tab for you. But what I have here is, again, kind of the way that we identify inputs is by shaded yellow. And you can see here, this is just kind of an input where we're inputting to a stored intersection where we can update things like our merit percentages, when that merit is going to start. We're going to start in month 3, for example. We've got things like our FICA limit percentages, Medicare, so on and so forth. And then we're able to also then to update things like our total days and our days in period for each one of the months. Okay, so these can be adjusted. And again, we consider this an admin, or because I don't want to have to go into every cost center. A cost center may want to adjust a merit percentage by, by employee, but perhaps company-wide, there's been guidance that says, we're going to have a 3% or 4% increase. So I can go in and I can make changes such as that, and it'll tell me at the bottom what has changed. Okay. So those are every and any drivers or global assumption that you want to be able to leverage and just calculate all in one full swoop versus having to do everything by individual employee. So those are kind of our global inputs. We also have more of a prep step as part of the accelerator where we're loading everything to a base data source. We've got everything with our merits, our annual pay. This is what we have loaded in from our payroll system. This is, again, by employee. You can kind of see we've got our cost center here. Basically what this does, I'm not going to run this data action right now because I've already made some adjustments to show you for the demo, but it's just a copy. So we basically store everything that we get as kind of the golden copy, right? We know what the annual pay is currently, we know what the global assumptions are going to be, and everything's going to have a start month of January and end in December. My demo here shows based on a calendar year, but of course we can do this based on fiscal year as well. So essentially this will just take and make a copy there so that we always can look back to see what the original was versus what I'm going to do now as part of my planning process, which is going to be within my input data source. Okay, so these are two things that I would typically do from an admin perspective to kind of set things up. And then the next step would be to enter in your employee-based plan. So I'm just going to close out of here. And so I will go to my cost center inputs by employee. And that opens up my cost center employee plan input. So here you can see just kind of laying out the story here. We have 5 tabs along the top. So we have cost center. Now we're talking about individual cost centers. So I've just, again, for demonstration purposes, I have everything set to all. So if I draw your eyes to the top here, we've got our story filters. So company code or entity, maybe a story filter, and then within there, what my cost center is. I just have 6 cost centers here to kind of give a small view of this. So I have it set to all so you can kind of see. And then what version, and we'll talk about versioning here towards the end, as it relates to being able to create different scenarios and plan out different ways of viewing our data. So then with my filters set, I'm going to leave those as they are. I have different inputs that I can do from a cost center perspective. I have existing employees input and modifications. I have new employees. Then I have basically the calculation for any, the compensation, payroll taxes, benefits, things along those lines. All those take place there. And then just kind of a report that ties it all together. So here, if I could be changing, for example, we've got things that are specific to 401k, any overtime or other benefits that we should consider, again, more from a global perspective. So anything that is shaded in yellow, again, is a potential input. So I can update this for sales, for marketing, wherever I'm going to have to make those changes, and we'll go ahead and recognize that. So again, pretty simple template, nothing much more to cover here. If there were additional, this is where you can find, where you can add in the additional drivers or benefits once you have this deployed in your environment. So things that would be more specific to you, you could have, certainly add on to this template. From an employee perspective, so here is, refresh this. You can see our cost center. So perhaps maybe I should just have selected sales, but you can see all my cost centers here, my employee, whether they're active or non-active, their position, and their FTE classification or grouping or group. Then I have basically where their base annual pay has come in, and this is where I have the capability to adjust their annual pay. So then I have any additional adjustments. This is where, again, I may have the 3% that you can see for the majority is here for everybody, but I've gone in and I've made some adjustments to Brian. I've made a slight adjustment to Sarah. So there could be some additional things, some adjustments here. But for the most part, I'm actually able to see and modify those. You can take that capability, I want to say, away from them, but if you don't want, you can go ahead and limit, merit increase, for example, if you didn't want one of these to be modified, if you want it to be standard across the board. Start month and end month. So if we know that somebody will be rolling off, or if we know that somebody's coming back or starting, in February, this is where you can basically adjust where the expenses are going to fall within the year, within your annual planning buckets. Any bonus targets or commission targets get updated as well. And so, as I mentioned before, these are just areas where you can come in. Anywhere that is in shaded yellow are your input, right? So you can see that it automatically makes a change. I change it 2000, updates here, so on and so forth. So here's where I would update and any of my employee level information. Okay. So we talk about that from an existing employee, but then what happens when I have a new employee? So if I go over to my step 3, we also have the capability within the solution to plan for new employees. So if I take, so you can see here, I basically have some default employees set up that are just new hires 1 through 5. And so I can use those within my, I can use them within my cost centers. So sales can have new hire 1 through 5. Marketing can have new hire 1 through 5. Obviously, you could have new hire 1 through 20 if you wanted. These are just placeholders, if you will, into the system so that you can plan for your new hires. So I can come in and I could say new hire 3 for my sales, and maybe we need to hire a new general manager now for 50,000, just to give you guys an idea. So this is where I can come in and say, okay, and they're going to start in month 4, period 4. So I will start with period 4, and we expect that they will continue to be working with us at the end of the year. Are there any bonuses or anything that we need to consider? And if not, then we can go ahead and we can use our data action that basically is going to take any new hires and make sure that it's calculating included into the FTE count. So when I do that, when I click on, sorry, I may have done that kind of fast, but basically what I did is I clicked on the play button up here. So these are, if you're unfamiliar with data actions, these are basically triggers that allow me to automate calculations within the system. So we have the kind of play button here. This says calculate new hire, headcount, FTE. When I click on that, it's going to give me prompts, things that I should, that's asking me, what do you want to run this on? So do I want to run it on budget, select cost centers? I could run it on all cost centers. I can select just sales. Right, since I just made a change to sales. The entity or company code that I may be working with, the base month. So when I do that and then I select run, it will go ahead and it says that it executed successfully, and we'll go ahead and store those. You'll notice that when that happens, then the system automatically recognizes and identifies this as a full-time additional FTE. Now, if I come over to my employee benefit calcs, So this is where I have now my existing as well as my new hires. And so you can see here, actually, the one that I just added within my sales cost center. I have my new hire for that general manager. And I can see here for the annual pay, my start and end month, right? Everything that I just kind of entered in on my new employee tab now is showing up here. What I don't have is obviously all the associated payroll taxes, benefits, things of that nature. So this is true for any changes that you make to your existing employees, right? So back on step 2, as well as then any new employees. It's easy to see because we entered in a new hire and we don't have anything here. This is all based off of the last run that I did, but if I were to make changes, I would be able to make changes to my existing employees and then come back over here and recalculate my taxes and benefits, anything else that I've included in my global calculations. So again, I can come in here and now I want to run and calculate all those. And I can say I'm running this for the budget version, my input year, my cost center, and my entity or my company code. So let me go ahead and run that. I may have to run this in the background because this does actually run through quite a few calculations in order to be able to kind of get that fully burdened expense by employee. Okay. Well, we'll give that a minute to run. We'll come back and we'll show you. In the meantime, we can talk a little bit about transfers. So essentially, another component of payroll planning is being able to take your employees and move them from one cost center to another. So we have the ability to use our cost center transfer template. And really, what this is a data action. So the majority of this is, there we go. It's still running. So the majority of this report is really just showing the end result. So we can see here, I'll show you a couple examples, but essentially we have where we have our sales cost center, we have our manufacturing cost center. We can see that we moved where we have our start month. Essentially, if we have our start month here in sales, let's take Jody as an example. So in order to kind of view this report and how you're able to validate that the transfer process works in Analytics Cloud here, is that we have things like our start month and our end month. For Jody, is our end month in sales is period 3. And so I can see here then she picks up in period 4 in manufacturing, and she's scheduled to roll off period 11. So that's, without getting too technical, there's different data sources that allows us to basically include and see what the offset is when we're actually moving the expense. So it's actually, let's see if I can open this up. That's not what I want. This one that I want. Yeah, so you can see that essentially it's looking at it. You always had Jody that was going to be starting in month 2 and ending in month 11. Again, I know those are maybe weird months, but it's more to kind of illustrate how the calculation and the operation works within the solution. But it's able to say, okay, we are making a transfer, and so it's transferring out 8 months and putting that into the new the new cost center of manufacturing. So let me see if this finished. Oh, finally. I don't know why that took a little bit longer than it normally does, so I apologize for that. But it also could be my home internet. But so you can see here, new hire that wasn't populated. Obviously, everything has been filled in, so it's able to automatically calculate for you and post that. So that basically is what you would run. That's the stored calculation that's included that will go ahead and run all of those drivers for you. And then obviously we just have some reports. This is an example of a report that will give you some of that detail to be able to drill into. So I can see by cost center. Again, I can make different filters, choose my particular cost center that I may be as a user responsible for. But then I can drill into salaries and wages, taxes and benefits in a different way. And then I can do that by employee. I can look at, like a Medicare by each one of my employees if I wanted to. Right? I can look at it by existing, by new hires, and then down into even a level by employee. Okay, so this just gives you a reporting and review view within this story, within this template and workbook. Okay, let me go back to the transfers here now. So basically, this is a data action that we have created here. And the data action is what is going to perform that transfer of the employee. And so you can define for an employee what the transfer out month is going to be. So if somebody is going to be transferring out in March, let's say, for example, and then you can select the employees that you want. So I can do that by, I was going to use Maurice. So let's see, I can use my search function. There we go. So I can make the selection of who I want to transfer. Right. It can be specific on company codes that we may want to use. And then we're going to say from, so Maurice is coming from sales. And it's going to go to, say, manufacturing. Big change. So again, I have all of my fields filled out, and then I can go ahead and run my transfer. Right. So this basically, again, I selected one employee. You could have multiple employees, but in any event, it gives you that capability to, easily transfer. So now we can see that we have now been, it's now Maurice's end month in sales has been adjusted, and his start month and end month have been included down in manufacturing. And so all of that is what will drive where the dollars go, right? So our end month being in month 2 will allow us to see a couple months of expense for Maurice in sales, as well as then the remainder in manufacturing, as that is how the calculations are based off of. Okay. Then we also include another, again, just a view that is similar to the other view that we had in the employee input template, but this one will obviously include the end result of being having the transfers included. Okay. We also, for those of you that are familiar with Analytics Cloud and having something similar to a data source or an audit trail, we include those type of dimensionality so that we're able to capture the different movements and where if we're transferring in and out, we're not overwriting, we're making sure that we're showing that kind of trail of, okay, we've moved somebody from this cost center to this cost center, and this is the different pieces of it. Okay. All right, so we've done, basically we've kind of reviewed what the global assumptions will be, cost center inputs that would be by employee, showed you a couple examples of existing versus new, being able to run those data actions that we have set up for automatic calculations of FTEs, especially with the new headcount, as well as then the taxes and benefits calculations. Those are all, again, kind of predetermined, already set up within the solution for you. And then we have just a couple, again, report books, stories that align with what we were just viewing. So I have just based on either cost center or entity. I think I have one already open. Maybe not. All right. Let me open up this cost center one for you. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm going to close a couple of these out. So, okay. All right, I just have this one open. So what I did, and kind of more at a last minute here, is looking at the kind of what our overall accelerator provides, but wanted to also kind of show you the flexibility. At this point, we've talked about, you can see here that this is for budgeting. We're maybe putting together our annual budget. But what happens when something similar to what's going on today, where now we're recognizing that the government may be providing payroll tax credits, right, to companies. And so now we're almost wanting to take that budget. We want to create maybe a new forecast, reforecast, rebudget based on some of these items that we can look to, that will indefinitely be changed, right? So it's a big enough change that we know that you're definitely, you won't be tracking maybe against budget this year. So what I did was just to, again, some of this will be a little bit on the fly, but I wanted the ability to show you how I can go in. Again, this is a standard report that I have 1, 2, 3, and then I made a copy of number 1. So we're going to go ahead and modify that one. But essentially, these are the reports that would come packaged. But now I can take this and I can start to modify and do some scenario planning off of it. So notice that everything is done, obviously, by an employee. I'm going to come over here to just a different view of it, a copy of it here. Okay. And so you can see I've actually limited this one to just look at by cost center. I want to look at my taxes and benefits, and then I want to take a look at my head count. So all these pieces, all these components exist right now within my accelerator, within my planning solution, and I'm able to use that and leverage that as far as what I've got planned for the year. Many times when we're looking to reforecast, the other thing that we will do is instead we will go ahead and copy in our actuals so that we can have an actual plus budget or forecast full year view. Right now, what I'm showing you is just obviously a 12-month budget, but those can definitely be used via a copy package as well. But what I wanted to show you was essentially I can click on my object or my report in this case, and one of the options up here, if you're not familiar with it, is called version management. So these are where I can now take what existed as maybe my final budget, and I may want to make an adjustment and make some changes. So I have a private version out here already called budget version 1. I'll actually delete that one. I don't have to delete it. Obviously, I was trying to kind of test things a bit. So I could take my budget and I could very quickly say call this forecast. And I can copy all the data and create a private version. So now, again, if you are unfamiliar with version management, this is a really nice feature because public versions may be users that, again, these are kind of your published versions. So I have actual, I have budget. But now as the analyst, wearing the analyst hat, I can come in and I can create a private version. I can say, okay, I want to take a look, and I copied all the data over, and that was very quick, over to my forecast. Now I can look at it and I can adjust my filter here. It shows up as forecast, and I can update that over here. Sorry, I have it in two spots. I'm going to update my forecast over here. Okay, so now I'm no longer looking at a budget. Now I have a private version. So now I can come in and I could go all the way back and create a separate version and go back to employee-based, right, and make adjustments by employee. So if we're getting a $5,000 max credit per employee, starting after March, I can go in there and I could definitely do it by employee. I have the capability to make high-level adjustments, right here on the sheet. Now I'm going to come back in here because these are reports, so they were not set as planning enabled. So I can go ahead and check that box to allow them to be planning enabled. So I can very quickly, again, at either a high level within this model, I can look at taxes and benefits for all employees, or I can expand down and do this specifically for individual employees. But I can say, okay, what is this going to look like? I could even take cost center out of here and do it at a very top level by company, by, at that macro level, to be able to just make some quick changes. But I can come in here and start adjusting. Again, I could do this as a more granular approach and expand all the way down to my employees. I can come in here and I can, just say I want to reduce this by 20%, right? Or I can take this and say I just want to multiply it by 75%. So again, that's a very high level, but the point, didn't do it by 0.75, sorry. Let me put that back. That's opposite of what I want to happen. So, let's try that. There we go. Okay. So if, again, the point that I wanted to make with that is that I have the ability to, I can, again, at a very granular level by employee, I could make adjustments. I could set up an additional driver that would drive that tax credit, for example, to kind of apply to some of that. But even, again, at a macro level, I could say, okay, I know that, back of the napkin, that our payroll taxes are going to be reduced by X amount, and I can go ahead and apply that here, percentage or other. So the capability, and what that does is that actually applies it. And again, this is just for kind of visualization purposes. I wouldn't probably apply this to the benefits as well, but it will go ahead and make adjustments then to anything that rolls up to my taxes and benefits. So perhaps we would add another level in there that would just be taxes, and then one that would be benefits that would have its individual parents or roll-ups. But again, that's kind of the idea here, is to be able to have that flexibility where I can go ahead and not only that, but if this is a forecast or a version, notice I made that version very quickly. Right now, I guess going back to that to kind of round that out, this is a private version. Right? So again, as an analyst, I can come in here. I've done my research. I know, what we're probably expecting to see for our corporation in terms of, potential relief or other, and I can go in and I can make changes. I can make changes at this high level. I can go back and make changes to individual employee level. If this is a good version, I can take that and I can publish this, and I can publish it to a public version. And so now everybody can view it. It becomes on my dashboards and my reports where everybody sees forecast as an option. Right now, if, you know, Joe, my coworker, was accessing the same report, he would not see forecast as an option, or reforecast, or forecast version 1. Anything that's in private versions is mine to see. It's my sandbox, my playground, essentially, to make some changes. When I'm ready, if I'm comfortable with that, I can go ahead and I can publish. And so in some cases, you also may want to just have a starting point and publish the forecast because you want to gather input from others as well. That's perfectly fine. But just to point out that if you are doing some scenario planning and you've received guidance, maybe from leadership team or other, that, hey, these are the changes that we need to make, you can do that very quickly by just creating a private version, providing the results, and then determining if we want to go ahead and make it public for everybody to be able to choose and filter on. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Well, that is really kind of the conclusion of our webinar today. Just wanted to, again, show you the prepackaged solution that Simplify has put together, some of the concepts around it, the assets that are included, and then, also kind of talking about some of the flexibility, being able to do some quick scenario planning off of that. So hopefully this is informational, and if there's any follow-up questions, you can send an email to Lauren and myself from the invite. And I thank you so much for joining. Hopefully everybody stays safe and healthy, and everyone take care. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.